to the October 21st edition of the Global News Review. I'm Patrick Ryan, President of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, and I'm joined by Ambassador Dick Bowers and Dr. Breck Walker. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Hello, Breck.
Hey, Dick. Hey, Pat. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you guys. And before we get going here with our quiz question and the topics, etc., we have a little bit of celebration to share with our friends, and this is a surprise to you guys. This is our 100th podcast from the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We started podcasting a couple of years ago, and we added webinars to our program back in March when the pandemic afflicted everyone. But we have 100 podcasts, which include these global news reviews, our Election 2020 series, Global National with Carl Dean, etc. And all those podcasts are available under the umbrella of Global Tennessee, and they're on soundcloud.com/TNWAC. So congratulations, gentlemen, for your hard work of producing the show that we do here every week, along with your participation in the other programs. You're up to 100 podcasts, and of those, 60 are of the webinar video variety. So well done to everybody involved in the World Affairs Council. We have, yes, sir.
Sorry, I was just going to say congratulations to you. And normally, I think when you're the 100th or the millionth or something like that, you get some sort of prize, don't you?
I heard that the chairman of the World Affairs Council was going to buy us all steak dinner.
Wonderful. Congratulations. That's quite an accomplishment.
We'll have to see if he's in the audience there. And just a reminder that you can find, this is our wall of videos, youtube.com/TNWAC. There are a wealth of global affairs awareness interviews and reports stemming from the COVID onset back in February. We talked with a public health official from the Department of Health of the state, through the Election 2020 series, talking about everything from country issues to Russia, China, etc., up through global issues. And then we had a fantastic report last week with General John Allen and Jessica Matthews on America's place in the world. And you can see on the right hand side there, those are that's the list of our podcasts, numbering now up into the 100 mark. So all of that there is available for your viewing and listening pleasure if you want to take Global Tennessee and all of the various specialties that fall under that rubric along with you for your jog or your drive in the woods as you go out and refresh yourself. Take us along in the podcast form. Okay, one more remarkable note that we'd like to share. And we have congratulations on the 100th from Doreen Muller, and she is happy to be joining the first Global News Review. And I'll full disclosure, Doreen Muller is a cousin of mine in New York, so welcome, Doreen. Glad you're with us. One other piece of business before we get going, let me share this blast from the past. In the center there is Richard Nixon and his wife, Pat Nixon. And we're going to play a little Where's Waldo here. Ambassador Charles Richard Bowers is somewhere in that picture. And as you might imagine, if this was in the era of Richard Nixon, he probably was looking a little bit younger. And we'll help you find the ambassador. Can you see the oval there? Does that show up on the left-hand side? Ambassador Bowers in the bespoke attire of a diplomat in Poland. He was posted to the embassy in Poland. Can you fellows see him on the picture there?
Yep. I recognize myself. I'm looking a younger version.
Yes, and
that was a dicey moment. The guy with the red tie kind of like biting his lip there. Right next to me is the head of the Secret Service detail there. And he was really kind of worried that, wait a minute, we don't have this under control. And the guy next to him is the head of the Polish security guys. So I was the Polish English speaker, so I was translating one to the other and back and forth and figuring out what the heck they were going to do.
Now we had to do a lot of research, but we actually were able to come up with a transcript of that event, and and we determined that Nixon, he was not waving to the crowd, he was pointing at you, and he said, "Thanks everyone for coming," and Dick Powers is over there. So congratulations, Ambassador Powers, on your
holy Pat.
Okay, let's get on with the show here. We've got our topics of the week, and Dick, as soon as they come up on the screen here, if you could do us the honor.
Well, we got our three big topics today. One is Mexico and water wars, or don't drink the water, or who's got my water. Kind of all this going on. But there's an issue down there, and we'll get into that. Uighurs and global human rights. So the Uighurs are one of 55 ethnic groupings that China recognizes, but they are being suppressed mightily at the moment by the Chinese. So we'll talk about that. And then we've got presidential debates, international affairs, what's going to happen Thursday night.
All right. And pressing on, Breck, do you want to get us through the question of the week?
You bet, Pat. Thanks. We've added a question to our What in the World quiz drawn from a United States Institute of Peace report. And TENWAC has enjoyed a close relationship with USIP, and we're pleased to highlight their insightful reports from their website. So each week, question number 5 in our weekly quiz will be our USIP question of the week. And this week, that question is, the protest movement in this country, driven mostly by youth, is preparing for new demonstrations on October 25th, a key anniversary. The protesters have made gains with the support of Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. However, significant challenges remain. COVID and a downturn in oil prices have burdened the government of Prime Minister Kadami, which is facing the threatened shutdown of the U.S. embassy there. So which country is this? Is it A, Libya? Is it B, Syria? Is it C, Jordan? Or is it D, Iraq? Thanks, Pat.
All right. We'll have the answers at the end. And again, subscribe to the newsletter at tnwac.org, and you'll get that in your email inbox every Monday morning. And while you're on the website, please sign up for membership to the World Affairs Council. That's how we buy the ambassador a steak dinner every 100th broadcast. All right, let's jump in. Breck, I think you've got the lead on our top story, which is Mexico, don't drink the water, or whatever variation on that you and the ambassador have come up with.
Okay, well, thanks, Pat. And Pat and Dick, I'll give a brief overview on this, but we have a story today about a conflict between Mexico and the United States over water rights along the border between the two countries. Now, this is a story that brings together several different strands of the relationship with our southern neighbor, including the ramp up between the United States and Mexico following the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which was negotiated in the 1990s. Another strand is the sanctity of historical treaties between nations. A third strand is the impact of the sort of in-your-face diplomatic style of the Trump administration. The fourth strand is internal Mexican politics. And the fifth, and perhaps most tellingly, is climate change. And with regard to the last, climate change, this is a story that may, in other future context, be a harbinger of what's to come all across the globe. So I think, and I know Dick thinks, that this is a very interesting story to talk briefly about. And here's the backdrop. The U.S.-Mexican border, as everybody knows, is a very arid region, dry and arid. And in 1944, the U.S. and Mexico entered into a treaty where they agreed to share water with each other from their sides of the border to promote growth and economic development along the border areas. And this has come to involve billions of gallons of water that go from the U.S. and Mexico Mexico to the U.S. every year, mostly taken from the Colorado and Rio Grande rivers and their tributaries. Now, NAFTA, again, negotiated in the 1990s, increased agricultural trade between the U.S. and Mexico significantly. And as a result, because of this increased demand for Mexican agricultural product, there was a dramatic expansion of cultivated fields in the Mexican border states, especially Chihuahua, which bumps right up against the Rio Grande. And demand for water in the state of Chihuahua has spiked considerably over the last 25 years. But at the same time, climate change has reduced the amount of rain in those border regions on both sides of the border. And there has been a we are in the midst of a several-year drought, and 2019, 2020 have been two of the driest years on record for that region. This year, rainfall has been at 30% of normal levels. So Mexico has fallen way behind in the amount of water it is required to send to the USA. And the deadline for sending that water is coming up. In fact, actually, the formal deadline is in 2 days. It's October 24th. Now, Mexican farmers in the bordered state of Chihuahua, and they grow things like cotton and tomatoes and pecans and onions and chili peppers. Those farmers are fearful that they will run out of water and lose their crops next year if Mexico sends to the United States the water that they're supposed to in the next few days. So these Mexican farmers have for many weeks rebelled in one way or another. And initially those protests were peaceful, but they soon became more destructive. And there have been some federal buildings, small federal buildings burned, and cars as well, federal cars in that area. There's been an incident, a brief incident or two of hostage taking, although those hostages were let loose fairly quickly. But now we have what could be described as a little bit of an insurrection. In September, literally hundreds of these Mexican farmers seized control of the La Boquilla Dam in the state of Chihuahua. They seized it from an undermanned National Guard unit, and one protester, a young woman of 35, was shot and killed. Now, that dam that these farmers have now seized and control, that dam controls water that is used to fulfill obligations to the United States. And so the takeover was intended to stop any further water distributions and instead to keep that water in Mexico for use by local farmers. And again, the deadline for Mexico meeting its obligations, and it would involve sending a heck of a lot of water to the United States, is in a couple of days. Now, Texas farmers on the other side of the border, well, as you might imagine, they're apoplectic, that they will not have the water necessary for their crops. The Rio Grande Valley in Texas is a major agricultural area. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has appealed to Secretary of State Pompeo recently, asking him to do something but get us that water. Now, Mexico's president, his name is Lopez Obrador, and he has said that Mexico is going to send the water to the United States, whether the state of Chihuahua and its farmers like it or not. And he's dispatched additional National Guard units to the area to take action if necessary and if he orders it. Now, the Mexican farmers in northern Mexico in the state of Chihuahua say that President Obrador, who was elected 2 years ago on a center-left political platform, that the president's not looking after their interest. They argue that his political support is centered in the working class of the more urbanized central and southern Mexico areas, and that northern Mexico, where they are, has historically supported Obrador's political opponents. And the governor of the state of Chihuahua, by happenstance, belongs to the opposition party as well. Obrador, on his side, says that the unrest, that the seizure of the dam, is being fomented by wealthy farm interest and the opposition political party to curry favor in next year's elections, and that the small farmers in the state of Chihuahua are being manipulated. And he promises that there will be no water crisis in Chihuahua next year, though again, he's right now is promising that that Mexico is going to send that water to the United States. Further, President Obrador argues that Mexico needs to do this because they have to maintain good relations with the United States. He worries that if Mexico does not fulfill its water obligation, that the Trump administration might impose tariffs or even close the border, which would be a significant blow to the Mexican economy. So right this second, it's unclear what's going to happen, but whatever is going to happen pretty quickly. Most likely, I would think that what's going to happen is that there'll be a deal struck between the United States and Mexico, reducing near-term water distribution from Mexico, and that the water which is sent to the United States will come from reservoirs serving Mexican cities in the area and not from these rural communities in the state of Chihuahua. And that in return, the United States will give some sort of backstop or will agree to lend water back to those Mexican cities if they run out sometime next year because of the ongoing drought. And in return for that, I'm sure that President Obrador would hope and require that the protesters will give the dam back to the proper authorities. But this is an unpredictable situation. You never know what the Trump administration might do here, especially in the run-up to the election. And Obrador clearly can't allow this occupation of the dam to go on indefinitely because it sets a bad precedent and it hurts him politically. So the only thing, though, that I'm confident about is that all parties, from the Texas farmers to the northern Mexico farmers to both administrations, all, I'm sure, are praying for rain right now. But as well, this cross-border clash with Mexico is likely a preview of the water conflicts to come all over the world as population growth and climate change increase competition over this important and vital resource. So Pat, I'll leave it with that if it's okay.
No, that's terrific. And you're exactly right that this isn't a problem exclusive to Mexico or the desert Southwest. We've had years and years of competition over water, the Colorado River Basin and other waterways that flow from one state to another, the competition for irrigation and drinking water and so forth. And the Colorado flows through several states, and it's critical. So this is really the first inkling of competition with the United States and one of our neighbor countries. Dick, I know we see, especially in areas like the Middle East, but not just confined to that arid region, competition for water. And I can recall studies 25, 30 years ago when I was still in the intelligence community, estimates of the years 2015, 2020, 2025, that water could increasingly be seen as a reason to inspire conflicts between countries. And what is it, the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Project, or dam in Sudan, damming up the Nile River, and the Egyptians are, they claim that's a existential threat to their existence. And if you look at Egypt from space, you see a little green line that follows the route of the Nile River up through Egypt, and they really depend on that. So you could see how these waterways, a lot of the competition between Israel and its neighbors are over waterways. So it's going to get worse. Climate change is a problem. There's forecasts that by the year 2050, the Arabian Peninsula will be inhabitable. We're going to see tremendous geopolitical economic shifts, and we're already seeing it. A lot of the migrants going to Europe are fleeing from war and other economic issues. But a lot of that is driven by climate change. The crops are failing, and they just can't sustain themselves on the lands that their forefathers lived on.
If I can jump back to the Mexican deal with that, I think, Brett, you did an outstanding job kind of summarizing exactly what the issues and problems are. I looked into the original 1944 treaty, and interestingly enough, it says it only deals with the Rio Grande River from Fort Quitman. down to the Gulf of Mexico. So El Paso is 80 miles north of Fort Quitman. And I said, wait a minute, why this chunk? Well, come to find out, in 1906, there was a convention between Mexico and the United States dealing with that section. Mostly it's El Paso and the area outside and Ciudad Juarez on the Mexican side. So the whole river is now covered. And in fact, there are 3 water basins: the Rio Grande Basin with all of its rivers, watershed, the Colorado, and the Rio Tijuana, which starts mostly in Mexico, but partly in the United States, flows all through Mexico, and then ends up south of San Diego. So all of these are now covered. But the one other fact about, I think you're right, that to the 1944 treaty gives preferences, that the water is to be allocated according to preferences. And the first preference is domestic and municipal use. So that's basically drinking water for cities and towns. And second is agriculture. And the idea of, well, we'll swap some water you can drink in your cities, but keep sending over the bulk water to make sure we grow the tomatoes. I think that's probably what's going to happen. And the end story is, my understanding, we send a whole lot more water south than the South sends north. So, one hardball option is, you owe us 1 million gallons of water. We're going to keep 1 million gallons of water that we would have sent you otherwise. So it's not going to be an easy issue. And it's worldwide, as Pat, you pointed out.
No, good points all. I think that actually the U.S. sends maybe 4 times as much water south in different areas than they receive it. But
I saw that same figure, but I was afraid to use it because I couldn't verify it. But it's pretty clear we send more south than they send north.
Now, I didn't read the treaty, but so you may be able to substantiate or correct this. But in reading about the treaty, it doesn't have any enforcement provisions, and maybe that's
That's
so
correct.
Unusual for treaties as a whole, but that's interesting that it doesn't. It just says
right.
everybody
If one side doesn't live up to their bargain, there's nothing the other side can do except, well, we won't live up to our side of the bargain.
Right.
And it gets pretty technical. I mean, all of the various feeder rivers, for example, that flow into the Rio Grande, some of those rivers, we on the north side or they on the south side get 100% of that water in that river. Others, it's half of that water, and others it's 1/3 of that water. So it depends on where that river is in the watershed that ends up flowing into the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo, as our friends in Mexico call it. So it's
no trivial issues for the people who depend on that for their livelihoods and their sustenance.
No, I mean, we didn't get into it, but California, I mean, the guys go nuts with somebody messes with the water rights coming from the Colorado.
Yep.
Well,
all right.
Let me just add one thing, Pat, if I could. The LA Times, in writing about this conflict, characterized it as complicated as the movie Chinatown, which was also over California water rights way back when. So
there you go.
Anyway, sorry, Pat.
No problem. Good stuff. Let's move on to the question of the Uighurs, the minority in China, and we're going to. For the first time, we're going to actually screen a quick video. This is from The Economist, and I thought this was a good scene setter for our conversation. So let's get this rolling here. Well, that was an interesting report by The Economist, and it summarizes what's going on in Xinjiang province. I would note a couple of things. One is the surveillance system in Xinjiang is probably the Chinese surveillance system on steroids, but it is not exclusive to Xinjiang province. It's ubiquitous in China. That surveillance, facial recognition, accumulating big data, knowing who's where, when, that's all going on. I had a friend who was flying into Beijing before the pandemic and walked up to a kiosk, and before they could enter their boarding pass or visa information or any data, the kiosk lit up with their full account. It knew who they were approaching the kiosk without any interaction between the individual and the kiosk. So that's just one example of how big data is being used to keep track of people, not just foreigners, but Chinese as well. There's a system in China called the social credit system. Dick, Breck, I don't know if you've heard of this,
Yep.
where big data is used to track the behavior of individuals and corporations, et cetera, with the aim of building a trusted society in which people adhere to the rules, and it accumulates things. If you jaywalk, it will start to accumulate points. If you pay your taxes late, there's points that go into the system. And there are reports that people have been denied the ability to get on a plane or a train because they didn't have enough social credits in the system to allow them to be a trusted individual, and as punishment they were not permitted to do this or that thing. But getting back to the Uighurs, we've got a serious issue here of how to address that, given the current climate between Washington and Beijing. The Chinese are not going to tolerate anybody interfering in their internal affairs. So the likelihood that the United States will be able to change behavior in this regard is, what would you guys say about near zero?
Well, I don't to change behavior is obviously the ultimate goal, but to stand up for liberal beliefs in the world and a system of democracy where individuals count is something, we need to lay down that marker. The Chinese basically, it seems to me and others, I think, stability and economic advancement are more important than an individual's freedom. And that's antithetical to what at least our forefathers and what this country has stood for since it started out. In the future, security, because people are insecure, they will gravitate to someone who promises them some security. But it's a real conflict between two different worldviews, individual freedom and liberty and the worth of a particular individual, or are you part of a collective, and as long as the leadership gives you security and economic advancement, you're expected to toe the line.
And I think the key word in the stability equation there is total control of the Communist Party.
Yes.
They are not going to tolerate any pushback to their authority anywhere in China, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, wherever.
Well, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, though, that with all the mass migrations of meaningfully sized populations from other places throughout Western Europe and parts of Asia, it's interesting that issues are being raised that haven't been raised before in terms of that are from a government perspective, national security issues. And if there were a large separatist movement to develop in northwestern China, that would present some problems for the Chinese government. And even human rights advocates like, if I'm pronouncing this right, Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, she has come out for not as bad as the Chinese, but certainly has been in favor of. So it's just interesting, some of these issues that are raised now that are modern day issues that governments are, and again, I'm not in any way condoning the Chinese at all, but the governments are dealing with issues that are difficult ones right now.
Well, yeah, I think in the case of Aung San Suu Kyi, she was elected to the head of government there, even though the military is clearly behind what's going on in Myanmar. But she went to the UN and openly defended the government's actions against the Rohingya, which are basically ethnic cleansing, pushing them out into Bangladesh, raiding villages. So there's been open genocide in the country, and she's stood up. She's a Nobel laureate. There was a movement among some activists to strip her of her title of Nobel laureate. So you're right. There's being a human rights crusader, and then there's towing the line within your own government. So,
well, one of the things that the Chinese are trying to do is basically extinguish Uyghur culture. I mean, first off, the idea that there can be Muslims practicing their religion is antithetical to the control of the Communist Party. And I think they're part of this effort on the part of the Chinese for Uyghur women to marry a Han Chinese man so that they can eventually dilute the Uyghur culture and ethnicity. So this is, blatant racism basically is what this is all about.
Well, and there have been involuntary sterilizations of Uyghur women.
Yes, exactly.
So the question is, what do you do? The U.S. government is, going toe to toe with China over so many issues, and this is one of many issues. It certainly is at the top of the list in importance, along with security and other issues. There's talk of boycotting the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in China. Trade sanctions. What's the view from the State Department, Ambassador?
You lay down a marker, you tell them this is unacceptable and it's going to impact adversely our relationship. It doesn't mean we stop talking to them, but you have a whole panoply of kinds of things. As you mentioned, you can boycott this or put a tariff on that. I think in the bully pulpits of the world, we need to start engaging again. I understand that China and Russia last week were elected to the UN Human Rights Council. Well, both of these countries have horrible records. But the way the UN is currently structured and the way the US is no longer leading in the UN like we did in the past, these kinds of things will happen. And China will push its development model, which is we provide you security, safety, and economic growth, and we provide a country you can be proud of. So just shut up and toe the line. Well, that's currently not the idea of liberty as we understand it, and the right of an individual to pursue his or her own path to the life they want to have.
Not a good year for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It is not.
No, it's not.
All right.
We need Eleanor Roosevelt to come back and help us out in some of these things.
I think the footnote, moving on from China and the Uyghurs, is that there's a marked increase in the suppression, excuse me, of human rights around the world as COVID-19 provides a lot of autocratic regimes or autocratic wannabes the cover of suppressing human rights. So, we've seen even in places like India, where the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is evoking aggressive Hindu nationalism, and the Muslim minority there, if you can call 300 million people a minority, are basically second-class citizens. Likewise, in the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte is violating every canon of human dignity and murder campaigns against criminal suspects, whether they are or aren't. Brazil, Thailand, Hungary, other countries around the world are taking advantage of the cover of COVID to put down demonstrations. There was, even in Israel, there was an effort to put down a demonstration using COVID as the reason to prevent people from protesting Prime Minister Netanyahu and his being charged for various crimes there. So, gentlemen, any comments before we move on about the state of the world?
Strong men love fear. Whenever there's fear and insecurity, somebody can come around and say, I will take care of that. I will make it good for you. And there are people, unfortunately, out there who listen, including in the United States.
Well, and the one thing, good point. And the one thing I would add, Pat, is we've talked many times on this program about the lack of U.S. leadership, in my opinion, at least under the Trump administration. Global leadership has resulted in some chaotic conditions throughout the world. And I think maybe this is especially true in this area where President Trump from time to time not only says I'll do business with dictators, but he actually compliments them on the kind of people they are and the policies they follow. And I can't imagine anything that's more encouraging of greater suppression than that kind of attitude coming from the U.S.
Yeah. Right. The Economist had an interesting chart in their article about the Uighurs and human rights around the world. The United States among those countries around the world that is a weaker democracy since the pandemic started back in the springtime. So that's about all you can say about that. So let's move on to our third topic. We've got just a few minutes to briefly talk about the presidential debates, and we have here in Nashville, Tennessee, coming up. Let's switch gears here. The presidential debate at Belmont University tomorrow night. It's would have been the third debate in the series, but they skipped last week due to the illness of President Trump from COVID-19. He didn't want to do a remote debate, so that one was scrapped. And we're left with the event on the 22nd, tomorrow night at Belmont University. And these are the topics there. The Trump administration, the Trump campaign said that the third debate should have been on foreign policy. The debate commission, the head of the debate commission, said that there was really no precedent for that. So these are the topics that will be discussed: COVID-19, American families, race in America, climate change, national security, and leadership. Dick, what do you think about not having an evening devoted strictly to foreign policy, but including a number of other topics into the debate tomorrow night?
Well, the topics that you have up there, some of them can lead into that discussion on foreign policy topics. I think the fact that there's not something really focused hard on that is reality of where the U.S. is in the world at the moment. We do not have a glaring, gee, we got fire, ring the alarms, we need to take something, care of something in the world. So we're kind of tidying up the overextension that we had in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places in the world. But the American public is more interested in, I think, jobs, future, COVID-19, schools. So we're focused fairly inwardly at the moment. And I think that'll be reflected in the discussion, although I will posit that President Trump will have a list of success stories on his foreign policy, and he will tout them out, like, moving our embassy to Jerusalem, getting the Gulf states to recognize Israel. It looks like we're on the cusp of signing an extension agreement with the Russians on the New START treaty, things of that sort. So he'll have a punch list. Oh, and don't forget, he renegotiated NAFTA. Some of these things are kind of, wait a minute, what is this really a success story? Anyway, that's my take on it, Pat.
Breck, any thoughts on the debate tomorrow night? What are you looking forward to hearing from one side or the other on international issues?
Well, I'd love to hear some discussion about their respective strategies towards both candidates, their respective strategies towards China, American relations with China going forward. It seems like that's one of the 2 or 3 biggest foreign policy issues that whoever the next presidential administration is, will be dealing with. So I'd definitely like to hear about that. Plus, Pat, I heard there's a rumor, maybe this is false, that as chairman of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, it'll be your finger on the mic mute button during the debate. I was wondering about that.
Well, I'm not chairman, but thank you for that. Yeah, we are having a debate party. We'll mention that here in just a second. But we will not be cutting the mic off anyone. I think it's illustrative to see the candidates in their interactions. I think people are calling the first debate a dumpster fire. Hopefully we won't have that tomorrow night. They are they are turning off the mic for the first 2 minutes of each of the 6 segments in which each candidate provides 2 minutes to answer a question. So the moderator will be cutting the mic for that portion, but then the rest of the debate will be back and forth. We might as well talk about the debate watch. We're running long on time here, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that the World Affairs Council, in cooperation with the Tennessean and their project on Civility Tennessee, David Plazas, the editor of the opinion engagement section of the Tennessean and USA Today, he and I will be kicking off a debate watch party at 7:30 p.m. Central Time tomorrow evening. We've got a great collection of guest speakers. Panelists will talk about the mechanics of elections, campaigns. We've got some experienced people from senatorial and presidential campaigns, think tanks in Washington, and some local folks here. High school student is going to talk about the youth perspective on what's going on. So that should be a great lead up to the debate. So you can catch the pre-debate watch party at 7:30 p.m. And then we will have embedded in our Zoom meeting room the actual candidates debate. And we will be conducting debate bingo. And we're putting together bingo cards with all of the possible terms from big lead to come on man, whatever you think might be the appropriate utterance of one of the other candidates. So that should be fun during the debate, and then we'll follow up with a half hour of post-debate conversation. We'll do some surveys of the audience. And just as a marker here, we have broken our attendance level for a Zoom room. We're over 120 attendees. It'll be an interesting management problem, but we will endeavor to let everybody get their voice in the chat room, or raising your hand. Or
you have the mute button, Pat. You have the mute.
or in other way participating. So join us for pre-debate at 7:30, the debate, and debate bingo at 8 o'clock. We'll watch the debate and then have a conversation afterwards. We've got some messages here in the box. Let's see, we've got questions. Sana asked, hair from Uyghur female prisoners is making its way to our market. So that's not a question, but a comment. Austin Travis says that what's the likelihood of the ICC's initial investigation of China's actions against the Uyghurs moving forward to a full trial? And if that did happen, what would be the impact? Would the US support that even though we aren't an ICC member? Some general questions for the Gambia case against China and the ICJ as well. Dick, I don't know, and Austin, you probably know the answer. I suspect China is not a party to the ICC. We'd have to do a quick search. I
suspect the same. I don't know for sure, but I would suspect they are also not.
Yeah, Austin is correct that the United States is not a signatory to the ICC. In fact, the State Department has sanctioned some figures from the court over a case involving Israel, and there's been some pushback on that. So we'll have to take a look at that. But I think the answer would be that China would resist any interference from any body, the UN or a sovereign country, as far as interference in its internal affairs.
I agree.
Now whether the ICC has any legitimacy in China, we'll have to check that out. But I think that's the answer. Michelle Chan asks or comments, the U.S. And Saudi Arabia in 5-year wars against Yemen creates the biggest humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Million children will be starved to death. A big violation of human rights. Yes, I think human rights organizations are standing up against the campaign in Yemen between the Houthis, the Yemeni government, the Saudi military. The UAE was involved in a larger way, has pulled back some, but that's Yemen was in terrible trouble to begin with in terms of its economic development. There's a place where water resources are terribly taxed. The war has not contributed in any good way to resolving that problem. So yes, Michelle, you're correct that the humanitarian situation in Yemen begs for an intervention and a resolution of the battle there. Unfortunately, it's a symbol of the proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia claims that Iran is involved in arming the Houthis. There's been ample evidence of that. Iran claims that Saudi Arabia has no business there. So it's probably going to involve a larger resolution of differences between Tehran and Riyadh over their competition before the Yemeni situation is resolved. Dick?
No, I was just going to say, I think it reflects the fact that we have been supporting the Saudis in this effort from the get-go in terms of supplying munitions and equipment and various kinds of things. And basically, it has not become a political issue in the United States, except for particular groups who might want to try to rally pro or con. But Congress hasn't done anything about this. It's not people talking about, gee, we got to take care of this kind of thing. So it reflects the isolationism, if you will, or the inward focus of the American public.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move along here. We got to get to Breck's question. But first, I want to mention that if you're not already aware of our Election 2020 series, please take a look at the archives that we have of these panels. We really can't portray in this slide the quantity and quality of speakers that came together for these programs. Ambassadors, specialists from think tanks, scholars, military people across the board. Some top tier individuals got involved in this Election 2020 series. And all of these are in the archives at the youtube.com/TNWAC. So check them out. We still have the election watch party, the debate watch party, and part 2 of America's Place in the World. That will be a week from tomorrow. Ambassador Tom Pickering and Ambassador John Kornblum, moderated by Professor Tom Schwartz. And then several weeks after the election, we'll have a special program called What's Next. So that's it. We're going to jump to our question. Gentlemen, any other comments before we work our way out?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll get on the question. Breck, over to you.
All right. The question was, again, which country is going to have youthful demonstrations wrapped around a significant anniversary on October the 25th? And the answer is D, Iraq.
Great. Okay, just one last note that we are very pleased to mark our 100th podcast and 60th webinar. So we look forward to bringing you more programs in the Global Tennessee podcast series and in our video archive at youtube.com/TNWAC. And of course, you can go to our website and scroll down and see what's coming up on the calendar and sign up for our programs still to come. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Happy 100th.
Thank you.
It looks good on all of us.
Yeah, you surprised me with that picture you dug up there, Pat. So I'm going to have to find one of you in your submarine outfit there again.
Okay, well, good luck with that.
Have a good week, gentlemen.
Thanks, good to see you all.
Everybody be safe. Thanks for coming.